Hello and welcome to The Week That Really Was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week ending the 7th of March 2025. Vladimir Lenin, that old monster, once said that there are decades when nothing happens and there are weeks when decades happen. We have just lived through a week that I think has been decades long in terms of the impact on global affairs. And Sarah, you don't look like you've aged today.
And I wouldn't mind, but I've been everywhere. I went to New York, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
So we did our podcast early last week so that I could fly to New York and see Othello there's a run of Othello happening in New York at the moment with Denzel Washington and Jake Gyllenhaal, and it was fantastic. And then after that 2 hours, I just drank and ate my head off for a few days. It was fabulous. Even though to eat and drink your head off in New York or in America at the moment, you have to take out a mortgage. It's just so expensive. I mean, we give out about Ireland, and I think Ireland is expensive, but American prices for food and to eat out and food and drink is just insane.
Especially if you want to eat anything decent.
Well, we went to a pub because, sometimes it's hard to compare we went to a pub and Keith got a pint of Guinness, and a pint of Guinness there isn't a pint in terms of volume. It's about 75% of the size. I can't remember what's the pint in cc's or whatever.
I don't know, but I do know Americans have these very small measure of drinks, and there's the old tale that goes around of the Irish lad who went to Chicago for a summer and was working on the building sites, and the lads from Chicago said, "So how many beers can you drink?" And he was like, "Oh, 6, 7," and they fell off their tables, and then they handed him an American-sized beer, and it was like a little teeny medicine bottle, and the guy ended up drinking like 30 of them, and the Americans thought he was a hero because their portions of beer are very small.
Well, that small little foray into alcoholism aside, Keith got a one of them, and I think the euro is pretty much, anyway, euro for dollar is pretty much the same, and it was $12 for a Guinness. And then you pay a tip and tax and everything or whatever on top of that. So
that's nearly what you pay in Cafe and Sen.
How much is a pint of Guinness in Cafe and Sen? Is it not like 8 or 9?
Know. I haven't been to Cafe Insane or Cafe Insane, as we used to call it when I was a student, for many, many years, and I don't anticipate being back anytime soon. But yes, it's expensive.
Anyway, we had a lovely time.
We weren't here. Yeah, I'm glad to hear it. So you're back now. You're all refreshed. And while you were away, I mean, I don't think we'll even bother starting with the press conference, which happened this day last week, on Friday last week, because everyone else has talked it to death, and you have a fixed view as to who was in the right and who was in the wrong. But that all started it, and basically since then, the Americans have withdrawn intelligence sharing with Ukraine. They've stopped military aid. The Germans have said they're going to start borrowing loads of money to rebuild their military. President Macron is out there sounding like a latter-day Napoleon in terms of what he wants to do. Keir Starmer is talking about building up UK military forces. The Irish government is going to invest in jet fighters and maybe abandon our neutrality. And the entire Western alliance, as we've known since the end of the Second World War, looks like it's fallen apart. So what do you think about all this?
What do you think of all of that?
Yeah, just rough basic impressions on the week that we had. It's the week that really was. What did you think of it?
Well, first of all, I'm going to start by saying I think you're being a bit dramatic. And I think that, this is so to go back, let's roll back a bit. This is the Donald Trump that was democratically elected by the American people, and they wanted him to put America first and make decisions that were in the best interest of America. And if you are in keeping with that, that is what he is doing. And I'm not discouraged thus far that what he is doing will not ultimately lead to an end to the war in the Ukraine. And it's been said, and I'll say it again, that it's all very well for us to have opinions about whether what Ukraine should or shouldn't be doing, or what military interventions should or shouldn't be happening. But it's not our sons who are being sent to fight that war. So, that's my first point. Second point is that I think that there's a lot of posturing going on, but I'm not as concerned as you are. I mean, I think every time Donald Trump does anything, everybody freaks out and clutches their pearls and gets all, we're going to do this and we're going to do that or whatever. But a storm in a teacup, I think, so far.
I disagree. And obviously I disagree because, standard disclaimer, Trump derangement syndrome, and I don't approve of anything he does. And I'll reiterate, I approve of many things he does. I've been very encouraged by some of the attempts to clamp down on excessive social spending in the US on NGOs, for example, by Elon Musk. I think that in general, Donald Trump's thrust that the European Union should spend more money on defence is entirely correct. And I think he makes good appointments to the federal bench, even if, how invested he is in making those personally, I don't know. But I think he does a lot of good stuff. But, I mean, I also think that people just make excuses for him endlessly. You said that the American people elected him to, do all this stuff. I mean, the primary reason that they elected him was to combat inflation. That was the economy was the number one topic in all the exit polls and all the opinion polls leading in. Inflation and the cost of living was the number one topic. And this week he's driven the price of agricultural products in the United States up by an average of 10%. He's driven prices in general by 7.5% with his tariffs on Mexico and Canada. And then people will turn around and say to me, "Oh, but John, it's only a negotiating tactic. It's a negotiating tactic." Everything he does is, if you like it and it works, it's genius. And if you don't like it and it doesn't work, it's a negotiating tactic. To which I say, I mean, what is the end point of the negotiation, and at what point do people stop negotiating with him? Because he's torn up an agreement that he signed. The North American Free Trade Agreement that he's tearing up is the modified version that he signed in 2018. And now he's tearing that up with tariffs, which has obviously, caused market mayhem. And then at the same time as causing market mayhem, he's obviously provoked this massive crisis in Europe, where Ursula von der Leyen is going to spend $800 billion of euros, I should say, of our money on building a European defence. The Irish government is abandoning the triple lock. We're buying fighter jets. I mean, these are all downstream consequences of what Donald Trump has done. And you can say, okay, maybe he wanted us to buy fighter jets, but do we want us to buy fighter jets? Do we want us to spend billions more on our defence? I don't know what the answer to those questions is.
But I don't either, but that's a matter for us to engage with our own governments about. That's not a matter for Donald Trump. Donald Trump doesn't care about what we're doing with our military. Why should he? I mean, this isn't me defending Donald Trump. This is just like, he's the president of the United States, and we've had very weak, very shallow levels of debate about our neutrality, about our armed forces, about our army for years and years and years. We pay them shite. We treat them shite. We like to, kind of like cower in the corner and say that we're neutral on one day, but then come out Billy Big Balls when it comes to things in other countries when it suits us. So maybe it's time, forget Donald Trump for a second. I don't think it's the worst thing for us to start having honest conversations about things like the triple lock. It's more of the same kind of, maybe we need to be forced into a corner to have these hard conversations, but I'm here for it. That you have Micheál Martin a few years ago saying the triple lock has nothing to do with our neutrality. Now all of a sudden, we've had shallow level conversations. We've ignored our armed forces. We don't care. We pulled the neutrality jersey on when it suits us and whatever. And you know what, John? Donald Trump got elected. The world is changing. There's war in the Middle East. There's war in Ukraine. And maybe it's time for us to either shut up, whinging and moaning and having opinions about, like big, strong opinions about things that happen in other countries, or put our money where our mouth is.
Well, on that, I agree. I mean, unfortunately, and I know there are people who will be listening to this podcast who will be very annoyed about the position on the triple lock, for example. And I would recommend you go and listen to Ben and Jason on this, because they I think have substantively different views to what Sarah and I would have on the underlying question of neutrality. I've always thought it was a ridiculous position. I mean, I understand the instinct for it, but my view is you can't say you're neutral and then behave like this country does. This country, like, we have this line where we say we're politically neutral, military neutral, but not politically neutral. I mean, get bugger off.
Yeah, you can't be the guy. You want to be the guy in the pub who doesn't want to have a fist fight, but wants to sit in the stool and slag everyone off all the time. Like, eventually someone's going to throw a dig at you.
Yeah,
figuratively, literally, or whatever. But the world has changed, right? The world is changing. We've just opened the podcast by saying, it's a week, it's a century, whatever. The world is changing at a rapid pace. The entire what's the word I'm trying to find? The entire that's so annoying. the world has changed. The economic outlook has changed. The politics of the world has changed. The leaders are changing. What people care about. Like you're saying, and I take your point that on every poll and on paper, people in America said that they voted for Donald Trump because of the economy. And that might be true to a point, John, but they also voted for Donald Trump for cultural reasons, for cultural change, to stop a movement in one direction over another. There's massive immigration across the world. The entire visual or the entire layout of this is so annoying that I can't think of the word, but the world is changing.
Just drank too much in New York, didn't you?
Yeah, I know. My brain.
Your brain cells are still recovering.
Fried my own brain. But when things change, you have to change. And you can't just keep sitting in the corner saying that you're this, that, and the other, but also having such strong opinions on everything. Like we called the American president, not to labor the point that's been made on this podcast before, but Simon Harris is calling him a gal. We're very, very, very public on our feelings about Gaza and Palestine and Israel. You can't just at a certain point, there will be consequences for these kind of things. And you have to have honest conversations. So if all of this change and all of this knock-on effect or trickle-down effect from from Donald Trump, et cetera, forces Ireland into having those kind of hard conversations, well, then that's fine. Let's have those hard things. We are absolutely pathologically avoidant about having hard conversations in our political discourse, I think.
As people who read me, though, Sarah, will know, and people who listen to me will know, like it's not that I'm pathologically opposed to Donald Trump, but I am pathologically concerned about the direction. And I'll tell you what, because I like to look at. I'm not trying to pretend I'm smarter than anyone else or anything like that, but I do like to look at history for kind of parallels of what you're seeing. And I don't ever see a history of a country becoming greater again by doing what it's doing, which is just withdrawing from the world, particularly a hyperpower. This, to me, I've said for some time, it feels to me like we are in the late stage decline of what we've been living through since the Second World War, which has essentially been the American Empire. Now, American Empire, not formally, they're not sovereign over most of the West, but the West has been an American imperialist project. We share their culture. There have been American troops on the ground in Europe, in the Far East, in the Middle East, for decades now, and they're pulling back. And at the same time as they're pulling back, their economy is teetering. You and I have discussed on this podcast before the eye-watering scale of the American national debt, which is going to hit $38 trillion this year. It is simply unrepayable. It is now unrepayable, and the markets are tootling along for a little while. But there will come a point in our lifetimes, probably quite soon in our lifetimes, in the next decade or so, certainly before we're 60, where that becomes a massive crisis. And you've got the Americans, they're pulling back. They're pulling back left, right, and centre, and this is being painted as we're being great again. I also think there's a crisis of American confidence in trade. So why are we abandoning free trade? Oh, well, it no longer works for us. Well, what do you mean it no longer works for us? The reason it no longer works for you is because you have made your economy uncompetitive. You have lived off these trade deficits for years. You've borrowed all this money. You pay yourself more than you're worth. Then your manufacturing sector is uncompetitive. And what do declining empires always do? Declining empires always say it's somebody else's fault. And so it is the Canadians' fault. And we slap 25% on tariffs on Canada, and suddenly that makes it better. Or it's the Mexicans' fault, or it's the Chinese's fault. And it is the late stage American empire thing of we'll blame everyone else and hope our problems go away and hope that not only will we make America great again, but we'll get the rest of the world to do it for us. It is a fucking delusion. It's a delusion, and it will end in tears, whether Donald Trump is the president or whether somebody else is the president. And the parallel, what you said about Ireland and Europe and being responsible for their own defense is entirely correct. But what happens when empires pull back is that new warlords grow up and take their place. And you're remilitarizing Europe. You've got Germany and France going to arms. You've got Britain remilitarizing. You've got smaller countries remilitarizing. Lots and lots of countries investing in their armies is not the greatest prospect for peace that we've ever known in world history. I'm just saying that.
Well,
are you more of an optimist?
I am an optimist, but I'm also, I think maybe I'm a realist as well. I think that there's consequences to use your word, superpowers withdrawing and all of that. But at the same time, we have to take responsibility for what we have or haven't done in Europe and specifically in Ireland in terms of military, in terms of economy, in terms of loads of things. And, sometimes the crows come home to roost or whatever the expression is, and you have to just adapt. Yeah. And maybe we're in that era.
We are. The old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times, I think is very apt because these are interesting times. I mean, the Ukraine thing, I think, is fascinating on many levels because I feel like a whole generation is getting a lesson in political realism, which is that right across Europe, outside of the sort of political online right, which has been cheering for Vladimir Putin for a while, but if you look at the majority of polls across Europe, sympathy for Ukraine is still high. And yet there is essentially nothing that they can do to stop a peace deal at this stage that I think the vast majority of people in Europe regard as fundamentally unjust and a stop to Vladimir Putin. And that is because Europe has not been able to project what it considers to be its interests. And I think Europe is going to learn a hard lesson from that. This is the thing. What lessons do people learn from the positions that they take? Europe is going to learn the lesson that we need to be significantly stronger. And I think, do you not think that as a result of that, Ireland is going to come in turn under pressure from the European Union, like in a way that it hasn't before in relation to militarism and participation in the European army and the status of our neutrality? I think it obviously is.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know any time when in the past when Ireland has been put under pressure by the European Union that it hasn't bent over. So,
well, that's it. And I think it's interesting. I think I was thinking about the triple lock. In fairness, one thing I'll say, and I oppose the triple lock, but I think where people have a grievance is that, as I recall, the triple lock was brought in basically around about the time of the Second Nice Treaty to tell Irish voters who were concerned about neutrality that they were actually putting an extra layer on top of it. And you can vote for this Nice Treaty in the safe knowledge that there's now an extra layer of protection on top of it. And lo and behold, the treaty is passed. You wait a decent interval, which is 20 years. And in the course of human history, that's a very short period. And then you go, don't need it anymore. I mean, I think people have a right to be sore about that, don't they?
100%. Not even 20 years.
When was the Nice Treaty? No, I think it's 23 years. It's 2002, no. 2003?
No.
Or are you thinking of Lisbon? Lisbon was 2008.
Oh, yeah, no, I think I am. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up. Really felt old there for a second. Holy God.
Yes. You and I, Sarah and I met for the very first time many years ago. Our eyes met across the crowded count room for the Lisbon Treaty referendum. And the rest was history.
BFFs forever, John.
Yeah, indeed. All right. Mary Lou McDonald is not going to the White House. Did you know that?
I heard a thing or two about it, yeah. Donald Trump must be devastated.
She's very strong opinions about what Micheál Martin should say when he goes there, though. She told him this week that he has to go and press the case on the Gaza Strip in very strong terms to the American president. Sorry, I'm not going to ask. I was asking the easy questions. I always ask hard questions, but do you think it's a bit rich to ask the Taoiseach to go and tell Donald Trump the thing you're not willing to go and tell him yourself?
Of course it is. And also, with all due respect to everybody involved, and with a nod for our listeners about whether or not the election was the outcome that any of us wanted, Micheál Martin's the Taoiseach, and he doesn't need to be told what to do by you. You're not the Taoiseach, and you're not going as the Taoiseach. So if you wanted to go yourself in your position as leader of the opposition, we'll say. But you don't get to tell the Taoiseach what to do when A, you're not willing to go, and also you're not the Taoiseach yourself. So why would he be listening to you?
It's also just terrible advice. I was struck because obviously there were two different state visits or meetings in the White House that stuck with me over the last week. One was Zelensky, but then a few days before that, Keir Starmer was there. Remember Keir Starmer went to the White House?
Yeah.
You were there at the time. And so Keir Starmer rocks up and he just basically does this thing where he literally hands Donald Trump this giant gold embossed envelope that's a personal invitation from King Charles to go and stay with him in Balmoral and shoot deer or whatever it is they do up there. And then Keir Starmer takes to the stage and basically says, and of course Donald Trump is a great president and of course a personal friend of the King, and I know how much the King personally values his relationship and deep friendship with you. I'm skeptical as to how much of that is true. I'm just skeptical. But nonetheless, that's what Keir Starmer said, and Donald Trump beams from ear to ear because that's how you handle it. And then, of course, Zelensky goes. And Zelensky, I think he had a point. I'm on the record saying I think he had a point. But you could, I think, perhaps say, as my friend, our friend, Laura Perrin said, that he could have shut his trap for an hour and just taken it and gotten on with it. But he went and started trying to lecture Donald Trump. So how do you look at those things and go, as Mary Lou McDonald, what Ireland should do is go to the White House and publicly lecture Donald Trump about Gaza? Like, who thinks that's a good
idea? An idiot. But, I mean, but it's also just easy to say that when you're staying at home. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, you go, it's just so kind of childish. You know what I mean? You go over there. I'm not going. But you go in there and you tell him, blah, 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 blah. Also, Mary Lou, Mary Lou talks a lot about the variety of issues that are facing the Irish public right now, to live in Ireland. A lot of which I agree with, some I don't agree with, whatever. But that's not really important. All we've been told for years about the special relationship we have with America and how important America is, and America sneezes and we get a cold, blah, 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 and how reliant our economy and, we need this, we need that. And now there's tariffs and trade wars or whatever. And Mary Lou wants Micheál to go in and use his speaking time on Gaza, which you respect to every side on that particular issue. What about Ireland?
I wrote a piece for this about 2 weeks ago where I said that, like, I just think it's in the Sinn Féin DNA. Like, I think it's impulsive. I don't think it's logical. I don't think it is that they've sat down and gone, well, here's the most important issue facing Ireland. I think it is literally that they look overseas and they see fellas wearing balaclavas, holding guns and shooting the children of their enemies, and they kind of go,
I think they strangle them, actually. But...
Yes. Well, I think it is inherent to Sinn Féin's DNA. I think it is reflexive. I think it is impulsive. I think they can't control themselves. I think it is, whatever viewers at home or listeners think about my Trump derangement syndrome being impulsive, well, that's where Sinn Féin are in Gaza. It is they can't control themselves. They just cannot stop talking about it.
But two things can't be true at the same time. Like, Ireland can't be, facing into all kinds of problems, and Ireland can't be have an important relationship with America, and Ireland can't be not reliant, but Ireland's economy can't be, very much influenced by what happens in America. But then you also go over and use your speaking time on it to have a conversation about a completely different country. It doesn't make sense to me.
No, it's bananas. It's also
forgetting the fact for a minute, by the way, which is also quite key to this, is in that you're not only just going over to talk about a completely different country, but that you're going over to talk about it on behalf of a completely different country that Donald Trump is absolutely unbelievably against. So you're going to waste your speaking time on something that is a absolute hiding to nothing, so you can go back and feel morally superior to everyone else. Meanwhile, potentially tariffs are being introduced on your country that will make companies leave that are actually quite important to our economy, employment, etc. I mean,
this leads me on to a topic before we get on to the other topics we want to talk about, and to kind of do a break between the Trump stuff and the culture stuff we'll get on to. But is it just me, or have the political opposition in Ireland, made the most appalling start to this new government's term ever? I think I can't get over how bad they've been.
How so? Well, because, I don't want to be too snarky, but because they really covered themselves in glory going into that general election. But go on.
Yeah, but I mean, if anything, it's gotten worse. You would have thought after the general election that they'd start focusing on, the issues that cost them the general election. Start, talking more about the cost of living, maybe tack a little bit. Because the left had a bad election. They had a bad election in Ireland. There's no doubt about it. They went backwards in terms of their overall representation at all. Sinn Féin gained a few seats, but only because the total number of seats went up. They stood still. And yet, what have they been talking about since the Dáil came back? How much speaking time we're getting in the Dáil. That has been row number one. That has been the most
It's still going on. It's so boring.
It's incredibly boring. And the government are happy for it to go on. The government are delighted for this row to go on because no one understands it. They can pretend to be putting forward a cohesive case, and the opposition is on there yapping like everyone at home is going, what are you talking about? Yeah. Then we have the whole row going on for a while about whether Micheál Martin was calling Mary Lou McDonald a liar when he said she was ancient Brega in the Dáil. Remember that? Did you come across that one?
I did. Yeah.
I mean, he absolutely was calling her a liar, by the way, and then he said he wasn't, and he absolutely was. That's why he said it in Irish. He was trying to do that moon-tory, school teachery, school marm thing of, I'm not going to say it directly, but you were an ancient brega. It's one of the reasons I can't stand the man, to be honest with you. That's the
but
head teacher kind of like.
But a ancient brega means telling lies.
Yeah, it does, yeah. He was trying to say that it didn't quite know. Anyway, the point is, if you're Mary Lou McDonald, what you do in that situation, you go, you're an awful arsehole, Micheál. And then you move on. You don't spend a week jumping up and down going, he called me a liar, teacher. I mean, he is the teacher. Don't do that. Just pick yourself up and move on. And it's more about you than it is about the public. I mean, I'm not going to pretend I'm some kind of political communications genius or anything, but number one rule is talk about what the public care about, not what you care about. That's number one rule. Wrong?
Yeah, but I mean, I think that fortune favoured Sinn Féin towards the end of that general election campaign, and they kind of rallied a little bit for a variety of reasons. One of which was that Fine Gael had a terrible campaign. You know, there was a lot of undeservingness about everything that happened in that campaign, if you ask me. And so maybe Sinn Féin needed to have done worse to have learnt their lesson. But I definitely had an expectation right at the beginning that they were going to kind of learn from their mistakes, as you say, and start talking about the things that people actually wanted them to talk about. And you are absolutely right that so far it has been completely underwhelming. Don't forget, Labour have really gotten themselves together after the general election. Like, they're proposing that people should have to do the driver theory test. So that's been their Uberwallia since the general election elected them back in. They are
just unbearable. I mean, do you know what? I can tolerate the Shinners. I can just about put up with the social. I cannot tolerate the Labour Party. They are unbearable. Like, this week, Ivana Bashik's great soundbite in the Dáil was, Taoiseach, or Tánaiste, it was Harris she's talking about, if you're furious about the 200,000 cost of the printer, you'll be incandescent. Incandescent. When you find out about the 26 billion euro in fines we have to pay if we don't do the climate stuff. They're going, is this what you think the voters care about? The voters want us to do the climate stuff. The voters want people to take their theory tests again when they reapply for their driving. Now, I got my new driving license last year, my renewed driving license last year for another decade, so I'm fine.
I'll be incandescent if I have to do that theory test over and over again.
I wouldn't mind, but
it's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And it's like, nobody asked for it. It's completely absurd. And it just made, it was really successful at making everyone who heard it angry. Well done.
I think the problem in Irish politics is that the government are bad, but the opposition are 10 times worse. I mean, they just are. With some honourable exceptions, right? I mean, it's not just because we agree with them on a lot of issues. Independent Ireland had a motion this week about, cutting on NGO waste and all the rest of it. Then Michael Collins, who I like, Michael, if you're listening, it's not personal. He goes on Virgin Media Television, and he's asked, after putting forward his proposal to cut back on NGO spending, he gets the question, well, what NGO would you like to cut back? You know what his answer was, Sarah? Did you see it?
I did.
He couldn't think of one.
Okay. Hold on a second, though. He got steamrolled over by an unbelievably disingenuous Thomas Byrne, who was talking about how Trócaire and the GAA are an NGO. And let's just for a second be honest. Nobody who has the conversations of many of the people who listen to this podcast, people on Twitter, when people are talking about NGOs, anyone with half of a brain knows that what we're talking about is political activist nonsense NGOs that do nothing, not big NGOs. So he just does this really disingenuous thing where he starts listing off like sporting organizations, sporting NGOs in Michael Collins's constituency and saying, oh, what about this and what about that? As if like that's what he's talking about, knowing full well that that's not what he's talking about. Yeah. What he's talking about is unbelievably wasteful small NGOs that are like, paid 50 and 100 grand a year to, as I've said before, the feminist reinterpretation of Schindler's List on ice or some shite that we're all paying for, or we're now establishing, what did I say before? We're now establishing whether transgenderism exists in NITs. We're doing a study on that. Like, just garbage. And you know it, and I know it, and the public know that that's there, that there is absolutely excessive nonsense fat within our NGO sector that could be cut, that could be taken away. And the only person who'd be crying about it is some weirdo who wanted money to do a play about rats and nits and transgender people or whatever. And I'm very comfortable with that. Everybody knows that that's what we're talking about. You see it in America at the moment, what they're doing when they're listing off all the places money went that are complete horseshit, taxpayers' money being spent on things. That's what we're talking about, not the GAA, not Trócaire. And Thomas Byrne is either unbelievably disingenuous or is too stupid to have paid attention to the debate up until now. I don't know which it is. But in fairness to Michael Collins, the proposal was good. And okay, he should have listed off a couple of nonsense NGOs, fine. But his point is sound. And the disingenuousness from Thomas Byrne made me sick.
No, but you see, this is it. You see, you passed my test. You've passed my test that I would set for anyone who wanted to get involved in Irish politics. If I was put in charge of doing a test for who should get involved in Irish politics, I'd do the following thing. I would hire Thomas Byrne. I would employ him. I'd pay him like £500,000 a year just to sit in a TV studio 24/7. And everyone who wants to get in Irish politics, I would say, you go into this TV studio and you're going to debate Thomas Byrne. And if you can't make Thomas Byrne look like a complete idiot, you've no business getting involved in Irish politics. He like, you just did it. Like, so my question is not, I know you're trying to defend Michael Collins, but like, is what you just did so hard that he couldn't have done it? Like, we have opposition, even the ones who are good, I think, need to up their game. You can't, like, first of all, by the way, I absolutely would defund. What was the other one apart from the GA? Trócaire. I'd defund Trócaire in the morning. That's a Catholic Church organisation. Why is the state paying for it? I'd defund the GA. That's a private organisation that has received hundreds of millions in Irish taxpayer money, has had stadiums paid for it, puts up, like, has pay TV deals and doesn't pay their players. Okay, some voters think it's popular. I don't think my money should be going to pay for that.
Okay, John, but we can have like individual debates about the individual merits of those things. But what Michael Collins was talking about was the proposal was based on an equivalence to what Elon Musk is doing. And cutting fat, nonsense, stupid stuff, monies for plays and garbage. And what Thomas Byrne was doing was listing off the most emotive things he can think of. Yeah. Trócaire. Half the country doesn't know what you know about Trócaire and thinks it's just a lovely, lovely thing that gives money to starving children. The GAA is one of the cultural hearts of the country. So that's a good knife into Michael Collins. People won't like that because he just keeps talking because he's counting on the fact that Michael Collins has done a blank on the 97,000 nonsense list of things or places that money has gone that he could list off. So, okay, fine. He should have had a list. If you're listening to this podcast right now and you agree that the NGOs should be cut down, accountable, and less money being just given out with no questions asked, sit down tomorrow and get a researcher or a staffer to write out an equivalent list to the lists that are being listed off by Donald Trump's press secretary for Ireland and have them handed out to any person who's going to get a mic put in front of them in the next 6 months. Do that. Yeah.
Basically, it's politics 101. Anyway, that's my view. The opposition in general, on all wings, have been very, very poor. And like, when you're getting beaten by Thomas Byrne in a television debate, you're doing something wrong. That is just a statement of fact. Sorry. I have lost many TV debates, but never once Thomas Byrne. Let's move on and talk about, you wanted to talk about some Dutch lad called Joseph Danko who's eating a load of dinners. What's that all about?
Oh, Joseph Danko. Is that his name?
Oh, is it Darko? I've written his name down wrong. When I do my joined up writing, often my R's look like N's. I think you said it was Joseph Darko.
No, hold on a second now. I have to find it.
You're just purposely humiliating me here to prove to the readers that I'm so bad at handwriting I can't read my own handwriting.
No, you're right, actually. His name is Joseph Awuah Darko. And basically, I've come across him. It's kind of an interesting little cultural sort of thing. And basically, the gist with this guy is he's 29. He has launched a Last Supper project tour of the world as he awaits a decision on his request for euthanasia. So in a nutshell, He's a 29-year-old British Ghanaian artist, and he's been documenting his battle with treatment-resistant bipolar disorder for a long time. He says it's treatment-resistant. We'll take his word for it. But basically, he has decided to end his life. He's moved to the Netherlands to end his life, and in the process of that, he's launched this project where he is meeting people for dinner. So since he launched the project, he's received like 3,000 invites for dinner, and he's been having dinner with people. And basically, not all of them, some of them are there to try and convince him not to do it, obviously. But there's an article about him in the Times, and then I started following him on Instagram. I was telling my husband about it, and Keith was like, "We are not having him for dinner." I was like, I wasn't suggesting that, but he's having dinner with different people. He had a dinner with this man called Emmanuel, and Emmanuel is 25. He's also planning to end his own life through euthanasia in the summer. But like, I suppose the reason why it's kind of interesting is because when we have these conversations about euthanasia, you'll often be, you'll always be told about hard cases and, the only in the extremes and this kind of thing. But the Netherlands is offering euthanasia to people who have mental health difficulties, and over 100 of them every year are people who are just in some kind of mental health crisis. And I think that the things that we were told would never happen clearly do happen. And it's a weird thing to follow because there's all these amazing people who come and meet him for dinner. And I was telling you earlier on that 2 Bedouin sisters flew 6,000 kilometers to cook him dinner. He had Persian food because some Kurdish Australians flew all the way to Amsterdam from Abu Dhabi to meet him and make him food. And it's kind of like this weird, on the one hand, really depressing thing. And then on the other hand, shows remarkable humanity of people and, I don't know, kindness or something. But overall, it's pretty dark that a person who's, mentally unwell can decide to euthanize themselves sometime from now and is meeting the other guy, 25-year-olds, who plans to die in a forest in Belgium or something. I don't know. And yeah, it's the side of euthanasia that you don't really hear that much about in the debate in Ireland. It's always the really hard cases with the really usually older person with the terminal illness that's just in pain and there's no other way out, and not this kind of thing. But this kind of thing is real too.
Well, even on that, though, they had the debate in the UK this week where one of the things came up, because obviously they're doing it there on the limited circumstances and everything. But basically, the woman, Kim Ledbetter, who's bringing through the bill, said to the House of Commons, to a select committee, that yes, if the bill was passed, then essentially, if you're eligible for euthanasia, or assisted dying, as they call it, because for some reason they think that's more palatable. It's assisted dying, passive thing. We're not killing you; we're just assisting in your death. But if you're eligible for it, a doctor has to let you know. Like, as soon as you walk in the door and you go, doctor, I have a sore hip. He goes, well, one of the possible, you're actually eligible, for the old jibby jabby. And like, people on the anti-euthanasia side were expressing horror at this. It's terrible. It's terrible. This will just promote, which of course it will. Of course it will promote euthanasia. If you tell people that like they have the option of doing it, of course more people will do it. And the left accepts that in every other field of human activity. That's why they want to ban gambling advertising or restrict alcohol advertising. It's because if you're telling people that a product is available to them, which is what an advert does, more people will take it. So I think that's interesting. And I also think it's interesting inevitably because we think about the demographic crisis that we're facing into. Like, the thing about assisted dying / euthanasia is that it's just cheap. Like it's if you're I'm thinking of that British patient before I talk about your guy who walks in and says, okay, I've got stage 2 cancer. It's potential escalatory risk, but you've got a long period of chemotherapy ahead of you and radiotherapy, and you may need an operation, and there's a several month waiting list for the operation. But if it feels too much for you, you're also eligible for euthanasia, and you're 77 or something like that. Like, there'll be a waiting list for one and a painful option on the one hand, and then there'll be the peaceful exit presented to you on the other hand. And over time, as more and more people start taking the peaceful exit, it is inevitable that the numbers will grow and it will become the socially expected thing to do in certain circumstances, including if you're just a depressed kid who's costing the state money in antidepressants. But I just find all this stuff, like the stories you're telling there. I mean, that guy, I was going to say he needs help. But I mean, it just strikes to me like it sounds narcissistic. I mean, I remember years ago listening to somebody very perceptive, and I think I've made this point on the podcast before, that one of the main drivers of people taking their own lives when they're young is the whole fantasy of, I can't wait to see what they say at my funeral. And
you're not there.
Realizing that you're not there. And yeah, I just think it's all very, I mean, this is clearly attention seeking, right? It is a form of attention seeking.
Yeah.
But I suppose 3,000 dinners, he doesn't have to worry about his waistline, at least. And maybe some of those people are hoping that they'll bring him a bit of food that'll make him go, oh my God, this is the best food ever. Like the time I discovered the Burger King Whopper.
I was like, is he going to do it? Is he going to do it? He is.
Oh, I love a good Whopper.
No, so it's just perverse, though. Tell people that what you do. You don't eat a Whopper. You just eat. Go on.
So my normal burger consumption is perfectly normal. Right? My normal burger consumption is I'll have my quarter pounder with all the trimmings. The only thing I won't have on a burger is pickles. Everything else is fine. But with the Burger King Whopper, I discovered years ago, kind of by accident, that the nicest version of that is just the double Whopper. So your 2 slabs of meat on the bread with just ketchup on it and nothing else.
Like you're like a giant man child.
Giant man baby.
No, the Whopper is the Whopper because it's got everything on it. And also, don't you dare say anything about pickles. Pickles are life. Give me extra pickles.
And people say we never disagree on this podcast.
I know, exactly.
Speaking
of nonsense food that's made by people who aren't talented, have you watched the Meghan Markle documentary about cooking?
Can I just stop there and say I'm so proud of you? That's a segue that I would have been proud of. That was tremendous. I have not watched Meghan Markle's Netflix documentary. I actually wanted to flick it on because they did a feature on Sky News one of the nights during the week, and I was sitting on the couch with my darling, beloved, and very long-suffering wife, and I said, honey, can we just watch half an hour of it, just please, so I can see how bad it is? And she gave me a look. So I'm surprised I'm still standing here and haven't turned to stone. Like Medusa wouldn't give you a look like I got for even suggesting it. So no, I haven't seen it. Well, you've watched this voluntarily, have you?
Well, it's just in the interest of research for our podcast, John. I watched some of it. It's pure garbage now. Garbage. It's somebody pretending to, like making a plate of fruit and acting like they're Ottolenghi, for those who are interested in cooking. That's a chef who makes very good cookbooks, actually. But I'm pretty interested in cooking. And as I was saying to you before, the sort of standard or the level at which cookery programs are at these days is just very, very high. You know what I mean? Like, and she's making a cake. And I mean, a Madeira, what I would describe as a Madeira cake with cream and raspberries in between 3 levels. Like, big deal. And acting as if she's just, split the atom. So I think it's a vanity project and it's really weird. But what I think is interesting about it is, and I've found it interesting for a while, and I don't think we've really discussed it on the podcast before, but it comes up on my TikTok a lot, is the slow return of the kind of Tradwife stuff. So for a long time, women in particular would have been kind of, you go out to work and the feminism and all of that good stuff. And a lot of so when I was a kid, I used to spend a lot of time with my grandmother, and my grandmother would have been, so she died when I was 18, she was 80, she'd be 100 now. But she would have been of that era where you made your own bread, you made your own scones, you knew how to sew, you fixed clothes, you made probably some clothes. And all those skills kind of disappeared. And now I notice on TikTok, a lot of, you see it with different people, a lot of Tradwife stuff is kind of coming back into vogue. Women who stay at home, have loads of babies, make sourdough starter and bread and jam and stuff and cook. And I just think it's an interesting cultural shift. What do you think?
I'm very skeptical of it.
Why?
I mean, first of all, I don't. It's a funny one because I'm never sure who these women are trying to appeal to. Because I know many. I nearly said I know many women as if that was like a thing to be proud of. But like most people, I know many women, and I know a good number of them who stay at home, and I know a good number of them who feed the children, and I know a good number of them who cook, and I know a good number of them who kind of like do all the things that women do. But what these women seem to do is like do it all in a sundress in full makeup, and also pose like, yeah. I'll just say it plainly. I think it is being sold not as a fantasy to women, but as a fantasy to men. And I think it is kind of toxic. And I think it is. I think it's overall negative. I'm not saying to anyone how to live their lives. It makes them happy. But I think the idea of the trad wife is just another porn trope. It's just another pornographic trope. It being brought back into society of this is the kind of woman that you want. I'm going to be the good little stay at home wife for you. Like I think it is. I think it is. We live in a culture, Sarah, that is utterly performative. And so there's that couple who live in Utah. They were in Cork recently, something farm. Don't know what they're called, but like he is the heir to the JetBlue airline fortune. She was a ballerina farm. That's what it's called. Now they live on a ranch in the middle of Utah where she makes homemade cheese all day, cooks for the children, and looks nice for the husband. And they're multimillionaires, and they were already before she started doing this. So why are you is it that you just love the work that you're doing? Or is it that this is all kind of performative to serve some kind of, vision that your husband has for you? I don't know.
I don't agree. I think, well, first of all, I mean, I'm sure your point is correct somewhat because we live in a world where everything has probably been turned into porn and will be at some point. But that's a matter for the mentalness of men, to be quite honest. But I think that the audience of a lot of this stuff is actually women. And I think that the reason why the audience of a lot of this trad wife stuff, and you see a lot of stuff on TikTok, Instagram, women who are interested, like women who have accounts that are about cleaning, about looking after your house, about cooking, about looking after whatever. And a lot of this trad wife stuff. And I think a lot of the audience is women because there is a part of women. I stayed at home for 8 years. I'm working again. But if I'm honest, I love parts of being at home and looking after my kids and cooking for my family and whatever. And I think a lot of those basic skills were sneered at for a long time. And that there was a lot of women who would be quietly doing things, but it was all about your career. I was talking to somebody today who was 26. I think she's about 26. And, she was talking about how even though she's got a good career or whatever, she really wants to have kids and have a family and she's willing to pause her career or whatever. And I felt when she was talking to me, I thought, I think that that's something that women are getting braver about saying, but that they would have been scared to say that as much 10 years ago. And I think that that's linked with this, that some of those core skills that were not considered to be high level skills, that were not considered to be skills at all, of homemaking and making food from scratch and running a house or whatever, were sneered at, demeaned, outsourced by women to other people because the most important thing was your corporate job. And I think some of that is coming back, and the audience for that is women. For sure, there's probably a porn element to it, John, because there's a porn element to everything. But I think the audience of it is women because there's a part of women, like women who have children, there's a part of their soul that likes looking after their family, cooking nice food, running a house, taking care of their kids. And that they were supposed to a point, and I know I'm going to be crucified for saying that, but they were supposed to a point to kind of smother that down inside themselves. Send your kids out to crash, be the ball-busting career woman, because that's the most important thing. And I think that there's something about that just didn't really sit right with women for a long time. And what you're seeing is a symptom of some of that coming back a bit.
You see, this conversation is making me into a feminist, which I've never been called in my life. But like I look at it and I hear what you're saying. I think there's truth to what you're saying. But I also look at this basically as a kind of like, why is it happening? Like, I think part of the reason why it's happening is the utter corruption of American dating culture and the internet, and the phenomenon where you've got a whole generation of men out there who aren't getting dates, and you've got a very few men at the high level who are dominating all the action, in inverted commas, on the apps. I mean, this is not me saying it. There are articles in Vanity Fair, the New Yorker. You read this stuff; it's everywhere. And I think what you are finding is just basically another way for women to market themselves to men, and to high net worth men at that. And it is, I mean, there all these Tradwives who are on the internet who are doing all this, they all have one thing in common, which is that they all have very rich husbands. That is not a you won't find anyone who's a Tradwife who's like, my husband is a mechanic. It's not there.
But then they're not doing it to get a husband, John, because they're already married in those cases. But like, they're not marketing themselves to men, because those women that you're talking about are particularly married. But I mean, so what if some of these trad women who are doing these things online are doing it to market themselves to as a hot property, as a wife?
I wasn't suggesting the ones who are already married are doing that. But I'm saying the whole phenomenon strikes me as...
But so what? Like, how is that any different? I mean, I have a daughter. Would I rather my daughter market herself online as a good wife, or would I rather have her arse hanging out in a G-string dancing around in a rap video? Why is like, you could theoretically say that all social media for young people is about presenting themselves or marketing themselves to the opposite sex as a potential husband, wife, or partner, we'll say, right? So would you not prefer your daughter to be marketing herself as making a sourdough starter and making kind of cakes than her arse hanging out? Like, how is this any different? It's just the same. It's the same thing in a nicer outfit, and we're supposed to be conservatives. I'd take this any day.
I ain't conservative in that respect. I'm sorry. Okay. It's very. And I'm gonna. Good Lord, I'm gonna start sounding like a Vanna Batch if I keep going on with this. But it is actually very gendered. Like, there are plenty of guys out there who like cooking, and there are plenty of women out there who might want to have a career. I know you're not saying. I'm not putting words in your mouth. I know you're not saying that can't happen. But I am saying that I'm not entirely sure that reinforcing this idea that this is trad, that the whole concept to be a traditional wife, I think it's a regressive step to market that as kind of like something that you should do or you should aspire to do. I think you can say it's a legitimate option, but I think there's an awful lot, and I think the way it's been corrupted by the culture is that it's kind of like it's telling a whole generation of young people that the traditional gender roles in that respect should come back. And I'm not sure that they should. I have many women working with me, including you, and I think you should be what you want.
But I don't think. I don't think anybody's saying that this is the only way. But I think it's an alternative, and I think that society, the internet, whatever, has been very silent on alternatives apart for women. Oh, and we can talk about men separately and men who like cooking and all that. No one's saying that. But what I'm saying is that we have been starved of alternatives to sexual promiscuity, all of the things that have been rammed down our throats for years and years and years. And this is one. No one's forcing anybody to start growing their own sourdough starter in the kitchen. They're just saying there is other ways to live your life. There is other values that you can encompass, and that's okay. And this is, I think, like, I know women, personally, girls will say, women in their late 20s who are single, who are more traditional, who do like this kind of stuff naturally, not just because they think it's going to trap a man, but because they're interested in having kids and having more of a traditional life or whatever, who feel very uncomfortable with the idea of, the hypersexuality that's been forced upon them for years and years, and the porn and the whatever. So this is an option for them. So no one has to do anything. But, if this is a different way to market yourself to a certain type of man, and this is a different way for men to meet women that are going to be the type of people that they're comfortable with, what's so wrong with that? Do you only want to live in a world, John, where everybody's just like, they're hypersexualized on Tinder and swiping left and right and whatever?
Oh, I've said for many times, I'm so glad I'm out of the dating game.
Well, yeah, exactly.
I'm so glad. Like, it's I do feel sorry for anyone who's it, but I know when I've lost an argument. Sometimes I delude myself that I've won an argument when I've lost it, but no, I've clearly lost this one. I think the viewers will, and the listeners.
Well, I don't know why you're claiming to be a feminist, because you're getting your arse handed to you by me and Laura every week. You should start to become more of a misogynist, really.
Maybe I'm a masochist if we're going to use words to describe me. All right. Look, I think we leave it there. I've had as much as I can take for 1 week. She kicked my ass on Trump. She kicked my ass on Ukraine. She kicked my ass on feminism. Oh, one of those weeks. Decades happened in this podcast, if not weeks. All right. Look, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for watching. As ever, I hope you liked it. Leave a comment. Ben keeps doing this thing on the other podcast where they say, send in questions and we'll answer them. And he should probably say, what I would say, which is send in questions and we'll answer the ones that we feel like answering. But we are launching this week on Gript something called the Community Hub, where we will be able to answer questions to you directly. And if you have anything you'd like us to address on this podcast or in any other forum, hub, H-U-B, at gript.ie. Send those to us. And if there are any you want to direct to me and Sarah, we will maybe answer them next week. Unless they are, why is John such a moron? Then I might not answer that one.
I might.
Yeah, Sarah might. All right, we leave it there. Listen, everyone, have a great old time and we'll see you next week. Take care.